What if I told you that amid the desire to return to normalcy with COVID-19, there exists an anxiety about what normalcy looks like? How will we interact again with each other? And has our world changed? This is an anxiety that all of us feel, but especially students as they look to return to school, re-engage with their friends, and learn in a perhaps different environment. So 2 years after COVID, how are they doing? How are they coping? And what does the future look like? Jessica Meade is a counselor who works with students in such situations, and she joins us tonight to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Chen. In the years during COVID-19, we all heard cries and perhaps made them ourselves of returning to normalcy. We had countdown clocks as to when we could unmask, return to in-person meetings, in-person classes, and the like. But as those have occurred, there is an odd sense of anxiety that's set in for so many of us. It's set in for those of us who are adults and even more so for those who are students. What has that return to school been like? How are they doing 2 years in? And what does the future look like for these students? Jessica Meade is a counselor with Foundations Christian Counseling based in the Lehigh Valley region of Pennsylvania. She joins me tonight. Jessica, welcome to Face the Issues. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Sam.
It's such a joy to have you here. Before we get started, just a little bit about yourself. You're a counselor. You work with a group called Foundations Christian Counseling, and you do a lot of work with students.
I do. Yeah, from teenagers down to school-age children, mental health issues kind of don't discriminate as far as age ranges. And so we've seen a huge increase in the need for children, teenagers, all of our students to receive some extra support as things have changed.
Yeah, and just crazy how everyone's been impacted in the last 2 years. We covered the COVID crisis from the day it started happening. We were doing it from home. I was still recovering from the virus myself, and we don't have to unpack. Everybody knows that the things have changed. There's a lot of talk about this anxiety post 2020, and let's focus on students returning. Have you seen an anxiety of returning to school since everything happened in the spring of 20?
Absolutely. There is a population of students who seem to really struggle with this idea of, they left school, some of them, in kindergarten, some of them, third or fourth grade, and then all of a sudden, it's 2 years later, they need to go back to the classroom and they don't have the social skills to feel confident in going back into the classroom and being around their peers. And some of it is also just a social anxiety of, that's so many people. It's so loud. It's not even just their personality, it's that they really don't have the skills. So much is taught in school too, so that when they've been home, they didn't get those things.
So even though they were continuing to do virtual school, it was very limited to the content, the course content, and not necessarily life skills, if you will, that you learn outside the class.
Correct. I think the teachers did the best they could, given the circumstances. The students worked hard, but even just, young kids who hadn't even been in school yet, well, now they're first and second graders. They didn't know how to even behave in a classroom. And so they couldn't even jump into academics. They had to go back to like, oh, you sit in your seat. And so for a lot of kids, this was really difficult. They didn't have a preschool experience. They didn't have, some of these things. And so it's really been challenging for the students, but also for the administration and the faculty of the schools, trying to kind of backpedal to fix certain behaviors.
Is there something there, we talk about these behaviors, is there something that drives it primarily? I mean, we talked a little bit about this idea that if you weren't there, you're in those formative years, you've missed some learning lessons. There's conversations and there's articles being written about this idea of nervousness of being back with friends and with teachers, a separation anxiety of now leaving your family, a fear of new regulations, and so this is the idea of masking or eating lunch at their own desk. Is there one that you see kind of driving it more than others, or is it everything plays a bit of a role?
I think everything plays a bit of a role in this. Some things maybe more than others. Kids really are pretty resilient. And I know that we heard that word over and over again. It was frustrating even as a parent to be like, yeah, the kids are resilient, but, you know, there's all of these other things. So kids, you know, have been resilient, but they also have this fear of the unknown. Like, you know, they were in school one day in March 2020, and the next they weren't. And they didn't go back, some for, you know, a year and a half. And so they really didn't know what to expect. Even the teachers and the parents didn't know what to expect. So we couldn't even work with our own kids, with our clients to say, well, let's preview, let's talk about what this is going to look like, because nobody knew. And so that made it really, really difficult.
So for you as a counselor, I mean, so for so many students or your patients, your clients that come to you, you are their guide.
Right.
What was that like? I mean, you not knowing, and that's a great point. I mean, as a parent, as an individual, you didn't know what the next school year held for your own kids. What was that like sitting down with people? If you even sat down with people, if you could sit down with people in the office.
We didn't do a whole lot of that. It was a lot of telehealth or virtual, which with younger kids is extremely difficult. Our teachers didn't get near enough credit for doing virtual school because it was really, really hard. But it was difficult because I didn't know what to say. You know, as an adult, we're kind of supposed to have the answers, you know, in our kids' minds, and we didn't. So one of the things that I found helpful as a counselor, as a parent, and is still really important, is this idea of validating what they're feeling. Wow, it's really scary to not know what we can expect. Let's talk about that. What does that feel like? And kids would, you know, kind of get into that a little bit. Let's draw a picture. What does school look like when you think about school? Just different creative modes. And so that became helpful for the kids, but it was still this fear of the unknown where we just didn't know, and sometimes we still don't know. I still have students say, well, what if school closes again? Well, we're just gonna have to take that as it comes. We can't control that. You know, and so that's good for our students too, but it is really difficult.
I'm interested, Jessica, in what you've seen pre-COVID and post-COVID. There's a bit of a debate. There are some who think COVID is what has led to anxiety among young people. There's another group that says, no, there was definitely anxiety before COVID, but COVID has helped accelerate or you know, escalate it. Is the kind of anxiety you see now different, or is it more of an escalation because of COVID?
Yeah, I think potentially an escalation. The anxiety has always been there. I think COVID has enhanced it. I think it shifted it a little bit. I have a number here from a parent report that 14.8% of parents reported worsening behaviors in their kids with the pandemic, with the shutdowns, with the unknowns. And so that is interesting. You know, what came first? You know, our populations are bigger, our numbers are bigger. You know, you look at the data, but you know, bottom line is our kids are struggling. It's not all COVID related. You know, the world is a really different place from when like you and I were in school. And so the kids have a lot more to worry about, to think through. And so I wouldn't say COVID caused this. I think it accelerated it, and I think it gave it different tenets that wouldn't have been there before.
When you consider that idea of COVID enhancing, I love the word you use, enhance it. I mean, do you approach it differently now that it's post-COVID? Like when you sit with your clients, or if you were to talk to a student that said, I'm struggling with this, is there a different approach now that's post-COVID?
No, I don't think so. And I think for some of the students, particularly like middle school, that is such a difficult time in everybody's life. You know, one of the things that I would love to see schools do more of is to have groups where it's like, you know, what's that like for you? This is what it's like for me. Let's, you know, normalize feeling these things. Let's not pretend like we're not feeling these things. Let's not pretend like it's not really hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think some of it, you know, the kids trying to, you know, I'm okay, but they're really not. And so there's this like idea where everybody's just trying to be okay, but nobody's okay.
Sure.
And so what would it look like if we normalize that it's okay not to be okay?
And everyone is.
And everybody has these feelings. And so let's talk about that.
So I'm not a kid anymore. I mean, I'm a kid at heart, but I still run that I'm okay line, right? And
Absolutely.
we see this with the professional athletes, right? So very recently, the Miami Dolphins quarterback had that big concussion issue.
Yeah.
The Dolphins are dealing with investigations from the NFL Player Association. And there's a part of it which is when they bring that player up and they say, hey, are you okay? The player goes, of course I'm okay. And they want to keep playing. Why is that we struggle to admit that we're not okay? Or even when we do admit we're not okay, you know, I always add that, but I will be.
Yeah, I do love that.
Okay.
I will be. Maybe I'm not okay today, but I will be. That's wonderful.
Okay.
I think we maybe need to teach our kids that. Like it's okay to not be okay today, but what can we do to be better tomorrow? What's going to help? I try to really talk to my I'm going to call them students, but my clients and their parents and say, you know, let's tune into what you're actually feeling. You know, on really hard days, even as adults, we have the tendency to be like, I'm okay, I'm going to push through it, I'm going to keep going. What happens when you stop and you say, wait a second, what am I actually feeling? What's happening right now? And to teach our students to do that, and that it's valid. Doesn't mean it's true, but it means that it's valid.
I like that. Okay, it's valid. Doesn't mean it's true, but it's valid,
Right.
and that's what they're feeling. I like that approach.
Exactly.
Jessica, we're going to go to break. When we come back, I want to talk about the impact that you think social media is having, as well as what solutions you have, how you work with your students. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Jess, thank you again for joining us and for being here. When we left off, you were talking about the struggle of just returning to school amid COVID-19, but also just this overall anxiety that students have and the idea of being okay and not being okay and how they approach that. I'm curious, this is something that I think a lot of people speculate about. As somebody who is a practitioner, who actually is rubber meets the road, you work with these people every day, this isn't just theory for you.
Yeah.
Does social media have an impact on young people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when I have parents that ask me like, Jess, how can I help? You know, they're really anxious. There's a lot going on. There's social anxiety. And I say, what social media platforms are your students using?
Wow.
And, you know, I don't even know all of them. So sometimes new ones get thrown and I'm like, well, I don't actually know what that is. But if your student's really struggling, take away social media. It's not a punishment. But there's so much that happens there. The students, again, I'm going to pick on middle schoolers. They're really impressionable.
Yes.
Well, I know, you know, if I'm scrolling through, you know, a social media site or something, I don't see real life. Everything is filters and, you know, best case scenarios. And if that's what our students, my clients are seeing, well, of course they're going to feel some anxiety. Well, you know, my room doesn't look like that. I don't dress that way. There's so much comparison that's happening that it inherently promotes this idea of this social awareness that leads into the social anxiety.
This is something I feel like we experience as adults.
Absolutely.
Right? And to the degree that we see everything around the world and people around the world, and so now we have the burden that's well beyond our community.
Yep.
When you talk to people who develop social media, people like Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and Jack at Twitter, they'll tell you that the goal of it was not to isolate people or to make people feel bad. And I have no doubt about that. The goal was to create these communities, but it seems like the result that's not what they're getting. Is there a sense where social media can create a community, or do you think in many of these cases just the negative outcome of it is just not worth what it could potentially do?
I think it can be a good thing. And I think particularly during, shutdowns, when everybody was at home, there was kind of a sense of like, you would even see the popular people, but they were filming from home.
Right.
Well, you could tell they were filming from home. There was this idea of like this shared, like, we're all doing the best we can. And I feel like once we hit this normal again, you're not seeing that. You're not seeing people, Skyping in from home or Zooming from home, wearing headphones and no makeup, and there's a dog barking in the background. Everything is back to like pristine.
Yes.
Everything is perfect. And boy, that's just so unfair to everybody to think that that's how real life is.
Right. That's fair. And just great advice, I think, not just for students, but for adults too. Sometimes you just got to get off your phone.
Absolutely.
And unplug.
Yep.
Let me ask you this. I mean, when you look at your students, your clients, and the fears and anxieties that they have, in this case with returning back to school into that environment, is there a timeline for how long this stuff impacts them? I
don't know. And I'm a reader, and so I've been trying to, read the latest reports and the studies. And the problem is there's not that many because we're still so new. We're not even a full 2 years. Right, full 2 years? Yeah. Almost. About 2.5 maybe. There's no longitudinal studies.
Right.
I think in another 10 or 15 years, we're going to be able to look back, look at the actual data and say, here's what happened. Here's how we should have fixed it. And so we're kind of in this tough spot where it's like, we don't really know what this is going to look like because it was this collective trauma, if you will, that, it's not even just our students, our teachers, parents. It's so multifaceted that, it's really, really tough to say like, we need another 6 months or we need another year.
Right.
We don't know.
In 10 or 15 years, we'll have you back.
Absolutely.
We'll have this conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
But along those lines, are there life lessons that you share with your clients now? I think back, we just hit, I think a year or two ago, we hit the 50th anniversary of that famous Apollo 13 incident. And the commander, Jim Lovell, was speaking at a school once, and the grad student said, given your experiences with Apollo 13, do you have any advice for graduate students who are dealing with stress? And of course, everybody laughed because it's apples and oranges, but is there a sense in which if you've lived through this and you walk through this, there are things that you can learn and grow from that in a future stressful situation, you're better at it? And what do you point out to your students about this?
I think some of the things that it's helpful to remember and to point out to my clients, their families, that I think when you went into this crisis, if you will, when you had people, and I use that term like, my people, there's friends, there's people that you were still able to connect with, that was really, really helpful. Then the people who were already isolated, they just became more isolated. So I think everybody experienced this isolation, but if you're already disconnected, and so I think it's really important to find a connection somewhere with a group, with other people, with people who are like-minded, that you can feel this sense of community when things get hard. That's
a really good point. And to do it now.
Do it now.
And not wait for another shutdown to come.
Absolutely. Or another crisis or something where you're like, wow, I really wish I had people. I wish, I had a community. And
it's something, at least in my experience, it's something that I don't know that I think about until I'm in that moment where I want it.
Yeah.
Right? Is that normal for humans to?
It is. Okay. And so when I work with my clients, like coping skills, you have to practice those before you need them. If you tell a child who's struggling and having like a meltdown, well, no, let's just take some deep breaths. Well, they're going to hyperventilate in the corner because we haven't practiced that. And so there's so much that we need to do kind of on the front end before we need it. And so that's one of my biggest things, like what can we put into place so when things get hard, they're already in place.
Same idea if you don't fix a leaking roof when it rains.
Absolutely, right.
Jessica, let me ask you this. What advice do you get? Because it does, there's the idea that it takes a village.
Yeah.
And it does. And so you're one piece of this. And certainly it's not your responsibility to make sure that right? So what should teachers be doing? What should parents be doing? And what should those of us in the community be doing in order to help our students as they continue this journey?
I'm so glad you asked that, because it really is so important. And I think the biggest thing we can do as professionals, as parents, as teachers, is to work together. Okay. I think there tends to be this idea of like us versus them. I'm not even sure how that happens. Human nature, I suppose, but this idea of let's work together. How can we support our teachers? You know, our kids are in school 8 hours a day. They're not in my care. Yeah. They're not in your care. Like, how can we support our teachers? Because their jobs really changed with the pandemic. And so how can we support our teachers? What does that look like? In turn, how can the teachers support their students at home? How can we work together to make sure that everybody's on track and everybody is doing the best they can? What services can we bring in?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I love the way you put that, because I feel like there's, at least in American culture, almost a segmentation of life, right? Where we kind of divide it by, well, this is your school side or your work side, this is your home side. But our life is fairly interconnected and interdisciplinary. And so what happens I remember working with an executive coach years ago, going through a personal struggle, and I said, on our call, I said, let's not talk about it. It has nothing to do with what we meet for. And she goes, well, it actually has everything to do with what we meet about. And it almost seems lost a lot in our culture. Yeah.
I feel like we lose the idea of our own humanity, if you will. And, you know, even, you know, our students, they think the teachers, you know, young kids think their teachers live at school. Like, what does that look like? And, you know, I think some of my clients think I live at the office that I work out of. Well, I don't. Like, I have a home and I live a life too, and some days are hard. And so what does it look like for our kids too, to know that like their teachers have a life. Their teachers are just humans too. And so how do we embrace our humanity together to just be real and to work together to make our students, our clients, our kids successful?
I remember the first time I saw my teacher when I was young at the supermarket, and I thought, why are you here?
Right, you don't eat food, do you?
Last question, if a student is watching this, if a kid's watching this, or you're to sit down with one, what do you tell them if they're struggling right now?
Talk to somebody. You don't have to pretend to be okay. That's my take home. Talk to a teacher, talk to your parent. There's people around who can help, and if they can't help you, they can help get you involved to somewhere that can help. Somebody who's going to listen, because we care.
That's fantastic advice. Jessica, thank you. We're going to cut the break, but don't go away. We'll come right back.
Sounds good.
Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Jessica, thank you again for joining us. This is such an important topic. I think 2.5 years after COVID, it hasn't gone away. And these anxieties are things that we live with. One of the things we love to do on the show is get to know our guests as people and not just what they do and their talking points. And so I'm always curious about what someone's why is. You do so much great work, you help so many people, but it's also in a lot of ways, it's hard work. And I've always been told being a counselor in some ways is being kind of like an emotional punching bag for other people. So why did you get into this line of work? And is this what you've always wanted to do?
It is what I've always wanted to do. My mom will tell you that when I was in kindergarten, I wanted to be a bus driver. But pretty much once I moved on from wanting to be a bus driver, I wanted to be a counselor. And so that never really wavered, which is kind of funny. Most kids want to be an astronaut or you know, something. I always wanted to help people. That was just what I wanted to do, and that's still what I want to do. And it's really a privilege to be invited into people's stories. I know people's darkest moments and their happiest moments, and to be invited to share that is amazing.
And so once you knew what you wanted to do, I mean, has that just been your trajectory? This is what you went to school for? This is what?
Yeah, pretty much. I did take a few years off, and I became a summer camp director. And I did that for a few years.
Which is similar.
You know, I use my counseling skills there sometimes more than I do now. And so, you know, we shifted a little bit. I had a few years off to raise small children. But yeah, it has never wavered. Not really.
You've never become a bus driver?
I did not become a bus driver. They are unsung heroes. Any bus drivers out there, thank you so much for what you do.
That is very true. They are very much unsung heroes. Let me ask you this, if there is somebody who's watching this and they're interested in this field, they want to go into counseling, what encouragement do you give them and what caveats do you give them in that journey?
Ooh, that's tough. I think encouragement, if you feel that you're being called to do that this type of work, don't ignore it. Okay. There's so many different ways. There's different types of counseling. There's different groups you can work with that, you know, there's a place for you. And so I have an undergrad in psychology and then a master's in counseling from a seminary. There's different ways to do it, and I would encourage anybody to look into that if they're interested in helping people and wanting to just be invited into people's lives. Yeah, and caveat, if there is one? Caveat. You have to become a little thick-skinned. Okay. Because some days are really hard. Sure. Some days I'm really glad that I have, you know, a 15-minute drive home to kind of decompress because life is hard. And so sometimes taking it all in on a really long day can be a little bit draining. Yeah. Last question. I know you're a person of faith, as am I. What has that been like to be a person of faith in that role, in that journey? Yeah, I feel like that's the only way that I could do this line of work, is to have a belief that God is bigger than all of what we deal with here. And so I feel like that's the backbone of what I do, the biblical counseling. I don't think I could do this secularly. It's just, it would be very different. Sure. Jessica, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your so insights, but especially for the work that you do in helping so many young people on their journeys. Thank you so much, Sam. That is our show for tonight. I want to thank Jessica Meade for joining us. Such an important topic. 2.5 years after the pandemic rocked our society, the effects are still being felt, and it's people like Jessica who are helping others through. I also want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you'll join us again right here next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.